Hello, everybody, and welcome to a new episode of What the Field. I'm Emmeline.
And I am Roman. Today we're joined by Kelly Go, co-founder and managing director of Auro Chocolate.
In this episode, we would like to hear your story, how you came to found Auro Chocolate, and everything about the world of chocolate and cocoa production in the Philippines.
Yeah, sounds great. Happy to be here.
Maybe you could start by telling us a bit about yourself. Like, how do you come to be a cocoa producer and produce your own chocolate? What's your story?
Sure. Actually, mine was not really a straightforward path. I studied political science in university. And then after that, I really wanted to do something food related. My family is in food, and I've been exposed to the industry my whole life. So I went to culinary school. I went to Le Cordon Bleu for a year to really pursue my passion. And I tried working in the kitchen because I thought that was going to be my future, but I felt like it wasn't really for me. I felt like it wasn't the best use of my skills, especially because I'm actually quite clumsy. So I really wanted to combine my passion for politics and food. And now I say that I'm kind of in the politics of food and making it better. So I founded Auro Chocolate with a best friend of mine. Our passion is really, we wanted to go back to the Philippines. And cacao. We didn't previously have background on it. My mom had actually been starting a project for a couple of years working with cacao farmers. We saw that, and we saw such a great opportunity to focus on quality and really create a premium Filipino chocolate brand. So that was back in 2017. So my co-founder, Mark, he's into branding and advertising, and so really put our heads together to create Auro, and it's been a wild ride since then because the brand is now 5 years old.
Wow, yeah, I can imagine. And what would you say were the main challenges, especially as a young and female entrepreneur, and also as someone starting out in the production of consumer goods, which is we know it's quite a difficult area to get,
It's not the easiest. There's a lot of competition out there.
To establish yourself
for sure. And to go into food production manufacturing, which is not really the sexiest industry now, right? Everybody's in tech and wants to be in tech. And in many ways, these are kind of more traditional industries. So many challenges. I mean, firstly is that we knew we had the raw potential for amazing quality cacao. And maybe you can go into this a bit more. We have such a history in the Philippines. We have amazing farmers, but there really was not a lot of support and resources going into that. So our first main challenge was, how do we take something that was so raw and turn it into gold? And that's really why we named our company Auro, AU being the chemical symbol of gold, plus the Filipino and Spanish word oro. So we kind of combined the two because we believe we have gold, but we just really need to hunt it, refine it, package it in such a way that people would realize its intrinsic value. So we really worked on the quality. That was really why we took 2 years to set everything up. Primarily was because of really working with the farmers, working on the post-harvest process. Primarily the fermentation took a really long time to get to the quality that we wanted to start with, as well as having to start a manufacturing company from scratch, a factory. It was really not easy because neither of us also had manufacturing background, so we really made a point to gather experts in the field and work with them and their strengths. And then being a female entrepreneur also has its own share of challenges. I mean, I would like to think the industry has progressed a lot, but there's still not a lot of female representation, and I think that especially in the beginning, being young and female, a lot of people would question me. I mean, I was questioned in an international forum in Singapore.
Wow.
And was told that I was going to fail in a public forum when I was asking a very simple question, things like that. And I mean, of course, maybe I felt awful that particular moment, but you kind of use that as,
fuel
and strength, because you're disrupting the status quo, and there must be something in that. Like, why are white old men so fearful of this little young person who's just trying to question how things are done?
Yeah,
totally.
Kelly, you touched on a point earlier, which is why the Philippines has this gold, right? What are some of the characteristics of the Filipino cacao industry?
Yeah, it's so, so special. I mean, if you really go into our history, so we used to be a Spanish colony, and we had all of these ties, especially with Mexico, which was ruled primarily from that colonial government. And the Philippines, not a lot of people know this, actually the first country in Asia to cultivate cacao. It was brought through the Manila Acapulco galleon trade as really something so of value, right? And I always say, like, imagine how hard it is to transport cacao at that time. Like, you know, a crop that requires fresh water, how valuable people really must have perceived it to be. I mean, it makes sense because the Mayas, Aztecs used it as like almost as gold, as valuable as gold. So the Philippines has had it since the 17th century. We're also one of like very few countries that not only cultivate it, but we also have a cultural practice of consuming it. Very similar to Mexico.
Yeah.
So we have a raw form we call tablea or sicuate. It is really something that is consumed by Filipino families over like so many generations. It used to be the story that every Filipino family would have a cacao tree in their backyard, and mostly the women in the family would process it themselves and enjoy it at home.
What do they traditionally make with it?
Ours is a bit different because in Mexico they use a lot of spices. So in the Philippines we don't use so many spices in our cuisine. So it's really mostly just like raw cacao that they would make into this paste, and then they would add sugar. I mean, they would add hot water mostly, and then people these days add then sugar or like we condensed milk. There are also regional differences. Like some regions would put like ground peanut. So they also put their own spin on it, but not too much on the like spices route.
Do you normally use chocolate in your recipes?
We have a dish called champorado, which is basically a chocolate porridge. And it's traditionally, we have it for breakfast. And it's quite sweet, but we love sweet and salty in our culture. So we add sort of like our own version of a preserved anchovy to it.
Wow.
So that's like both like, so people ask me, is that a dessert or not? I don't know. It depends, right? Like it kind of defies category. It's its own thing. So it's really something that, and then the tradition is that you have it every single day. You have it like as a tea time beverage or breakfast beverage. So the culture was really there, right? But it's been, of course, disappearing, especially over the last like 20th and then more into the 20th. It's been disappearing a lot.
Interesting.
So that's part of sort of our thing is like how to reinvent this practice and make it relevant to
That's where you come
people
in.
today. Yeah.
It's interesting that all of the famous chocolate brands like Lindt, Milka, Cadbury's, especially basically the more conventional supermarket brand ones, outsource their beans, their cocoa beans. They get it from some faraway country, usually a very long way from where they're located at and where they actually produce the chocolate, Western Africa, Brazil. And then they make their chocolate a lot of the time in factories that might even be in Europe. And then basically there's a whole extensive supply chain going on there. They work with intermediaries a lot. They don't usually source from farmers directly. So there's a lot of travel, I guess, involved until you have the final product, right, that you buy then and take home with you. Why is that? Why don't they all do... Because you, Auro Chocolate, you do all of the process more or less in one space, right? You do it all in the Philippines. How come other brands are not doing the same?
Because the spotlight really used to be on the chocolate manufacturer. And that's why you know all of these sort of American, European brands. And it was all about the brand. That's common in so many consumer goods that we all love and we all grew up with and enjoyed. Well, as you mentioned, like all the cacao, cacao cannot grow in Western countries. It only really grows around the equatorial belt, 20 degrees up and below the equator. But only really recently has there been, since maybe as recent as like the 90s, very late 80s, 90s, has the spotlight shifted to more of the cocoa producing countries. And because that shifted, then consumers became more aware, like actually there's so many problems with this existing cocoa value chain, Child slavery probably is the biggest one, but there's also a lot of environmental wider societal issues going on, and that's because the farmer or the cocoa producing countries were really not part of the narrative at all. So this push for more we call like bean to bar or tree to bar is really making people more aware of what is that supply chain to begin with, and how to make it better, how to make it shorter, and how to bring most of it, especially tree to bar, is that can we bring most of that back to like the cocoa producing countries, that they don't just produce the cacao, but they have the ability and the opportunity to do the value adding themselves.
Just to clarify, so if I say bean to bar, tree to bar, if I read this on a label of, I don't know, the chocolate I'm buying at some store, does it automatically mean then that the farmer was more directly involved in the whole value creation process, basically, that there was a shorter supply chain?
Typically yes.
Okay.
Cool. Because bean to bar really came about as a movement to make chocolate better, not just in terms of quality, to really have more complex flavor. It's really reminiscent of what had happened with the coffee wave. Right? We always say cocoa chocolate is just like 20, 30 years behind that, but that's basically what's happening, putting more attention to fine flavor, as well as like what is the sort of commercial relationship between the farmer and the brand.
I think that's very interesting indeed, because when you look at the value chain of a manufactured good such as chocolate today, or a chocolate bar, for example, it's really interesting to see how the repetition is between the farmer, the manufacturer, the distributor, and it's completely imbalanced when you look at it. Farmers are not making enough to sustain their own small businesses.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, it's manufacturers who've got all the power, because they've got the buying power, and they can dictate the prices. So when you're drawing a price, it goes from the consumer to the farmer, and not the other way around, right?
Oh, exactly. And in the cocoa industry, it is a huge monopoly, like a cartel. 50%, around, right, of cocoa is produced by manufactured by one company.
Wow.
Are we allowed to say the name?
Yeah, I was going to say, no, I really want to know what the company
but it's just how uneven it is, and they don't really have the bargaining power. So I think that's changed a lot with like smaller makers, right? Created more of a demand for quality cacao all around the world, especially the Philippines.
And I want to touch about social conditions that you mentioned.
Yeah.
And I'm going to ask you a very direct question. Do you think we would be buying some of the big names if we knew what was going on behind their production?
Honestly, no. Because it's also quite hard to really know what's going on behind those curtains. They really put a concerted effort of greenwashing and hiding a lot of what is happening on the ground. Not to say that there are, of course, a lot of people who benefit, and these players are vital and important, but I don't think they are taking enough steps concerning how much power and influence they have to really change the industry. There's even this movement in my own world where they make their own certifications. Like brands will just brand their own certification.
So with no organ
and that means who's going to hold them accountable, right?
Yeah.
Who's auditing it?
Certifications have their own set of problems, don't get me wrong, but I don't think that's necessarily the right way to create more in your own.
It's like marking your own homework at the end of the day. And where do you stand? Where does Auro stand on this? Do you have a chart of working conditions for your workers?
Yeah, we've always been from the very beginning committed to being we are a social enterprise, and more now. I think our first main that we wanted we're known as one of the highest payers of cacao in the Philippines. So for us, that was the first most important step. Now we're trying to be more nuanced and complex in our approach. We're trying to look at gender and make it more equitable. We're trying to look at we have an organic certification program that's ongoing, and we're now trying to also look into the environment a little bit more. These are things we always cared about, but of course developing programs to tackle all of these issues related to cacao does take time, so we're now progressing more on those. programs.
Cool. Before getting into the whole environmental aspect of cocoa production, I do have one question that just occurred to me because I was thinking about a podcast we did on coffee production, right? And we did it with Maria Palacio, who's the co-founder of Progeny. I don't know if you've heard about them, Progeny Coffee, and that are doing basically a similar thing that you're doing just with coffee. And she said something very interesting. She said that you need to be careful with labels. And I'm saying this because you were mentioning companies making up their own labels. I mean, this is a bit different because she was referring specifically to an already very established label, which is fair trade. She says in the coffee production process, actually sometimes the ones who have the fair trade certificate are the roasters and not the farmers. So only buying coffee which says fair trade doesn't necessarily mean that the coffee was actually produced, the beans were produced under fair conditions. So I was wondering, is it a similar issue with the cocoa beans?
I know we make consumers have to work quite hard to if they really to distinguish and everything. Yes. Certifications come with their own set of problems. I think the most important for me is at least like most of the time it does not really change things on the ground and benefit farmers directly.
Yeah.
But some certifications are better than others, and that's mostly tied to which certifications can give the premium. Mm-hmm. Fair trade is one of those tricky things, is that it doesn't give enough of a premium, I feel, this is my personal opinion, to justify all the effort and everything it takes, and then enough to share with the farmer, right, at the end of the day.
Yeah.
But a certification may be a bit more like organic, which is really difficult. I think people maybe are not as aware of how actually difficult it is, especially in certain environments like the Philippines, where big agro is really everything. How much of a David Goliath struggle that really is, but we believe, I mean, at least from Auro's perspective, that it doesn't solve everything, but we find that it's an effort worth really pursuing.
Yeah. I'm glad you mentioned the organic certification, because that was actually my next question. So very on time. So what are some of the environmental challenges you face in the Philippines? Obviously, there's very extreme weather events in the Philippines, but also you just mentioned it's a David against Goliath sort of struggle when farming organically. Why is that?
So, I mean, the Philippines is, beautiful tropical country, but we are really seeing the effects of climate change. I mean, we have always been a path of super typhoons, and I think we see that happening, unfortunately, more and more often. Where cacao is mostly farmed in the Philippines, in the southernmost part, closest to the equator, used to be that would be protected sort of from the path of a lot of the typhoons, but now that's changing a lot. The seasons are so irregular, so even for farmers, it's harder to plan for that. Organic doesn't necessarily solve all those problems, but I think that in the long run, not only would it be better for the environment, but the farmers themselves, right? Because a lot of them also rely on subsistence farming and the own crops that they grow, right? And they're really like farmers who have expressed that, like they just feel better and healthier when they have converted to organic. The Philippine agriculture is a lot to get into, but really has been very susceptible to the influences of the agrochemical industry. We know this firsthand because we have an organic certification, conversion first and now certification program. Our goal is to be, an audit date.
Organic certified?
We are doing not yet.
Sorry, you're in the conversion process.
We're in the conversion process, but that, so difficult because basically we didn't have support from anybody. It was a completely private initiative between a farmers association that we had helped form and our company. We didn't have much support from the government. We didn't have much support from academic institutions. We're basically like swimming in our own pond. And everybody I talked to in the industry was like, I mean, yeah, that sounds really nice. As if it was like this vanity project, right? Oh, that sounds really nice, but it's never going to work. It's going to be too expensive. And your yield is going to really plummet. Like, okay, you can try, and we'll see what happens. That kind of thing. Like, people were just so, like, rather than like really thinking about it and seeing like, oh, how could it be possible? People were just dismissive, outright. But I think the timing for us couldn't be better because the price in the Philippines, and I think industry-wide, the price of inorganic inputs has really been increasing in the Philippines this year alone. It's doubled in price. So it's making our case for organic, I think, a little bit
And you're not doubling
stronger.
your prices, are you?
No, of course not. No.
So your margins
prices,
are just getting
I mean,
squeezed.
maybe they've increased by like 5% because of inflation. You know, it's not enough at all to cover the huge increase in input costs. So,
Yeah, I think this is something that farmers all over the world are struggling with at the moment,
and that's
prices
when
of fertilizers,
your
everything
soil
has
is
gone up.
reliant on it. I mean,
Yeah.
you see disastrous effects because of that.
But are there usually a lot of like synthetical agrochemical used for cocoa beans? Do they require a lot of
Not so
pesticides,
much, but we get a
herbicides?
lot of runoff because we have where cocoa is grown in the Philippines. You have banana, and banana's heavy user, especially in
Yeah.
the Philippines.
Yeah.
And they used to do aerial spraying.
So it affects your crop, right? When
Yeah,
you're,
even if it's just
when you're
like
nearby.
It's 2 miles away.
I mean, aerial affects everything, and then just the
Yeah.
runoff, even if it's not covering, they're not spraying your area.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's quite challenging also to find certain locations that could even, because of course, organic's not just necessarily just about your farm.
Yeah.
Yeah, a huge like sort of everybody around you could affect you. That's the tricky thing
Yeah.
about organic, but we're nearly there.
Yeah.
It's just been a lot of struggle. Also, the one thing I wanted to mention is like the Philippines organic by default, especially cocoa farming,
Okay.
means kind of a laissez-faire approach. Cacao is there, it grows. When there's crop, we harvest it. That's it. But the bad thing about that is there's no cultural management that's really needed, especially when you do the organic conversion. Plus, farmers are reliant on like quick solutions, and that normally means inorganic
Yeah.
pesticides, insecticides, right, fungicide, you name it.
Yeah.
They'll do it. So they'll be like, this is quite they'll be like organic 95% of the time, but it's the 5% that we kind of struggle
And
to deal with.
I think it's very frustrating, but at the same time, I don't want to blame farmers because they really don't have many alternatives, especially when there's no institutional support, no support from...
And why would they do it if there's really no incentive,
Exactly.
Yeah.
right? I mean, for them, it's like, it's pretty good. I'm doing 95%. Like, what's the problem with
Exactly.
that? Also, one thing is like, our farmers are amazing. They're really great, but they're not so into documentation.
Yeah.
You never see a farmer in the Philippines with like a pad and a pen. Like, that's just not the thing. Everything is through memory. Or like, when was the last time you applied like herbicide there? I'm like, oh, maybe 3 months ago. They don't have records. So,
Yeah.
I mean, it could be a good sign. They know their crops. They know how to work with nature.
right, but
They
certification bodies don't necessarily know.
Yeah.
It's like, where are the records, right?
Yeah.
So, it's been quite the journey. We've actually been doing this longer than the actual conversion period because there's a lot of we want to really work with the farmers hand in hand. We're not just there to dictate stuff. So we're picking the harder and slower path, but the light at the end of the tunnel is there.
And are you, because you were saying that you wanted to get more into the environmental side of things, I have to say I'm not an expert on cocoa crops, but I'm assuming it has, as any type of crop, some detrimental effects to the environment. Have you looked into ways to mitigate the effect that it might have on the environment?
Yeah, so soil health is a huge issue in the Philippines because of the reliance on inorganic inputs for so many decades. So that's really something where we're trying to have an organic alternative that is cost efficient for farmers. So that's one of the existing programs we have. Another that we have is we're looking for an alternative. So it's actually quite nice in the Philippines that they use this type of plastic to cover the cacao pods. Okay, is actually helping farmers to not use inputs. But then we create this other problem of having plastic waste. And we've even looked at, sometimes, biodegradable could be misleading because we looked at the biodegradable option actually creates microplastics, which, as we know, recently
It's not
it
ideal.
is actually worse,
Oceans.
right?
Yeah.
In that farmers then leave it on the ground, and a lot of those microplastics just don't biodegrade and are worse actually. So we're now thinking of working with like Plastic Exchange or other companies to try to collect So, you know, a lot of those smaller but very important initiatives along with, so I would say organic is a kind of flagship program, and we're trying to do other smaller programs to support that.
Okay, cool.
Do you want to move on to perhaps a lighter topic?
Sure.
Yeah, I think lately we've seen a lot of different chocolate flavors, and people are going completely nuts, pun intended, with different types of walnuts,
Aromas,
hazelnuts, whatever you can add to salt.
Chocolate with salt.
To your
Sky's the limit.
To your bars,
Yeah.
exactly. Where do you stand
Chili.
on that? Do you think it's the right way for the chocolate industry? More variety, or perhaps we should go to a more traditional, let's go back to our roots sort of approach?
Do you have any favorites?
It's really hard. That's a really hard question. Because I'm both a purist, but I love to experiment as well. So I'm really excited by all of that. I'm excited with all of the developments and the creativity that's going into chocolate. Because you can never have enough flavors. There's not going to be enough flavors for everybody, you know?
Yep.
It's kind of nice to enjoy. But for me, the thing is, like, the flavor is so exciting and important, but it's also nice to pay attention to the chocolate, which is the main, and cacao, which is the main ingredient. And
Right.
there's so much complexity, and I think people might not know this if they just focus on all those flavors. Cacao itself has so much flavor complexity. So there are times when I want to go crazy and have something like with tons of, like in Asia, we have even weird flavors like dried fish or dried shrimp on a chocolate bar. I mean, everything can be done, and I never say no. That's my thing. Like, let's try it. It could be like awesome or like horrible, you know? But it's also at the same time, it's nice to really just pay attention to plain chocolates because it lets the cacao sing.
Yeah.
And then taste the difference of the bean variety.
Yes, and because that
the
makes you appreciate
processing.
more like why a bar, let's say from Saloy, Philippines, versus one from Chuao, right? Like, I mean, all of those. Because when you taste them side by side, you're like, okay, I understand. They taste really different from each other.
Yeah.
And that's
I
why
mean-
it's great. There's so much diversity.
You do have the culinary background that probably, I think, don't have a more refined taste.
Oh, but I
than
say
other
chocolate
people.
tasting is for everyone. I think people get intimidated when they hear tasting. Oh, it's this fancy schmancy thing. But tasting is really, like, we're all born to taste. That's what I say. I love tasting as well. I do
Especially
chocolate.
chocolate.
I do tastings. And my first thing that I tell everybody is, like, we're all born to do this. And it's actually very simple. And the more you do it, the more you'll enjoy the product. That's it.
Do you think that one of the motivators maybe of adding more ingredients to the chocolate is sometimes also to hide the quality
Yes.
of the coffee?
So
the
that
cocoa
is
bean?
really why vanilla and a lot of craft chocolate makers really have strong feelings about vanilla, but that's because vanilla has traditionally been used to hide a lot of the defects
Right.
that are in chocolate.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Yeah. So my whole rule is, like, at least if the base of the chocolate is good, then feel free to add like as many random things that you want, right? But at a very minimum, the chocolate base or the chocolate itself the cacao needs to be good.
Can I get a quick temperature check on milk
Sure.
chocolate?
Yeah, love
Yay or
it.
nay? Yeah.
Yay. Yay.
Yay.
Great.
Depends on how much cocoa is in it.
Okay.
Yeah, as long as for me, the cacao is always the star, then
Yeah.
higher I would recommend to look for, like, higher percentage of milk chocolates normally. A little
Yeah.
bit better.
Great.
Okay.
I love it too.
And how do you feel about plant-based chocolate or vegan?
Super
vegan
excited.
chocolate? Yeah.
Most of the plant-based chocolate, it's not very good for my taste. I feel like it discounts a little bit the chocolate experience, but that's changing a lot in recent years. I have had really amazing plant-based chocolate from many brands, and just like a little shout out is that Auro is launching. We're
That's gonna be
launching-
my next question.
Yeah, we're
actually.
launching our own plant-based white and milk chocolate. And our goal really for that was that it has to be the best chocolate you've ever had. It so happens to be plant-based too.
Whoa.
Great.
I'm looking forward to trying it. Really.
Yeah.
Yeah. Dark chocolate is supposedly automatically vegan, right? I have a vegan friend who's always telling me, oh, it's fine if you just buy dark chocolate, it's automatically vegan. Is that true?
Mostly true. If it's plain, I would say mostly in Europe, yeah, could be true, but it's not automatically vegan because in Europe you mostly use beet sugar, and I think that that's a clean vegan process. But in other countries where you use cane sugar, cane. Part of some processors use bone char in the bleaching process. So I say not necessarily automatically. Most of the time, yes, but not automatically.
Could be not 100%.
Depends how like
vegan.
much of a how strict you are as a vegan.
That's good to know.
Yeah, and I think it's good. There should be more transparency about it. If you're using that process, people should be aware of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're coming back again to the whole supply chain issue
Exactly.
at the end of the day, right?
Yeah,
Like I said, consumers have to, they got a lot on their plate, a lot of things to know, but that's really important. At least, like, consumers now really are more passionate about what they eat and where it comes
much
from.
more conscious.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you, Kelly, about something that you've learned perhaps since you started working in chocolate that has really changed perhaps your approach to life, or perhaps some of the misconceptions there are about the world of chocolate that you would like our viewers, listeners to know about.
One thing that we're all kind of brought up to know is like the higher percentage of, that is on a chocolate bar, that means it's going to be better for you. That means it's going to be more bitter and all of those things. And actually that's really not true. It really depends on the cocoa. So bitterness for cocoa, for example, really varies depending on the variety and depending on so many things of how it's processed. So if you grab, and some people are really proud of this, right? Like, ooh, I only have chocolate that's above 80%. And when you tell me that to me, I'm like, I don't really know that. To me, that means nothing. Because what? Like, you're just really, very bitter, like the percentages at all on the bars are just like an indication, but they by means like you could buy a 70% chocolate bar from one company and then from another, it could taste totally different.
Yeah.
So how does that equate in my life? I mean, it's just that you need to go deeper into everything. What we're told, and it's a lot of for me doing this, I really had to reflect a lot, not only in the industry that I'm in, but in a lot of things that I've been taught and all that. And it's good to have that critical thinking aspect, to always question things as they are. Maybe not too much, because then you'd go crazy of not trusting everything, but you get a lot of satisfaction in knowing how things work, and how the more you go into it, something I learned, sometimes you can feel really demotivated because it feels like the world is so broken. Like, how is there a future for me or for my daughter and all of these things? But it's to continue to persevere. And my only thing is if I could do more good in the world than bad, I'd be pretty happy about that.
That's a good approach.
Yeah,
that's
pretty
beautiful.
satisfied about that.
To wrap up, perhaps, because I think we're running a bit out of time. What do you think the future of chocolate holds for us? Or and specifically at Auro, where are you going next?
So many directions, but really what I think is that chocolate is going to be made by smaller producers. And there's going to be way more variety that you see on the shelf, not just the big brands, but, highlighting where the cocoa comes from, and hopefully a Philippine bar in a nice boutique shop near everybody.
Yeah, that's great. Can't wait.
Kelly, thank you so much for being with us today, for dedicating the time.
Thank you. So happy to be here. So happy, I want to say, with how much crowd farming has grown over the years. We were one of maybe the first early crowd farmers, and it's just been such a pleasure to see crowd farming grow to such heights and even more.
Yeah. You were with us from the very beginning, and I want to thank you again for being here in Madrid with us. It's truly a privilege to have someone who works on the ground, who knows the farmers, who knows the manufacturing process, who knows the struggles, who's got a background as a female entrepreneur. I don't think we appreciate that enough. So
super inspiring for sure.
Thank you for that.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you also to our audience for being with us for another episode. We hope you enjoyed this little field trip to the world of chocolate and cocoa production in the Philippines with Auro Chocolate. And until next time, bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.